Are you actually making progress in your personal development? Are all the courses and coaches and therapies and retreats and things that you're doing, is all the inner work you're doing paying off? Or do you find yourself just repeating the same patterns over and over again, regardless? This is actually not a mystery. We just have to understand how these loops actually work. So today I want to give you the model that I use for how to determine whether I'm actually stuck in a loop somewhere or whether it just feels like that and I'm actually growing. And also the inverse. When am I telling myself, oh, look at all the growth I'm doing, look at all the work I'm doing, but I'm actually still stuck in a loop? So with the right framework, you can figure it out and you can make sure that you get unstuck. The problem of being stuck in a loop, also known as the problem of different day, same shit. This, I think, is one of the most fundamental things to understand about personal development, about behavior change and making progress. Because first of all, fundamentally, we do operate in loops. Fundamentally, your existence as a human being is a whole bunch of different loops. And you see this over and over again, where you encounter the same situations in the same kind of context, slight variations of the same problem over and over again. And we got to be clear about a couple of things. First, some of these loops that you're stuck in are good for you. They're serving you. They're working for you. The loop of waking up every day, taking a shower, and brushing your teeth, nothing wrong with that. But also every healthy relationship is a series of different behavioral loops where you keep cultivating and reinforcing the good things that work. Unfortunately, we also get stuck in loops that don't serve us. And this is bad habits, addictions, stuff that you try to quit but you can't quit. And maybe most noticeably, toxic relationship patterns where we go, why do I keep having the same fight over and over again? And when you're doing personal development work, one of the things that can happen is that you feel like, why do I keep encountering the same problem after I thought I had solved it? The first idea here is that essentially you flip the loop on its side to see if you're going up or down in a spiral rather than just around and around in a flat circle. This is a concept you might be familiar with. I didn't invent this. I've seen other people talk about this as well. But I want to refine a little bit. How can you tell whether you're in an upward or downward spiral or not, and what does that actually look like? So if you have a situation in your life where you're stuck in a loop, what happens when you actually do something that leads to growth? You find a really good coach or therapist, you go to a retreat, you do the plant medicine ceremony, whatever it is, right? You do the thing that gives you the breakthrough, and then later you're like, hold on, why am I having the same problem again? What could be happening is that you have entered a spiral that leads either, a spiral of development, this is positive development, that leads either to the same problem at a higher level or to more subtle, deeper levels of the same problem. So those are the two directions of growth. The first one, up to a higher level, unfortunately, you might not like this, but the best way to think about this is you are encountering the same problem at a higher difficulty level. So what this might look like, let's say you have a people-pleasing behavior, okay? You've been a people pleaser all your life, you're fed up with it, and you finally do the therapy, the coaching, the whatever, and you feel like I'm making real progress here. But then later you find yourself again in that people-pleasing mode. If you are moving up a higher level, the easiest way to understand this is that you might start with being a people pleaser in general. You're always self-abandoning, you're always sacrificing your own needs, you're always ignoring yourself in favor of trying to please other people. You always want to make sure that other people like you, that you don't offend anyone, and so on. And this is true for everyone, like even complete strangers. You care so much about the opinions of complete strangers, like you would bend over backwards just to ensure that hopefully nobody is even slightly upset with you. And then after you've experienced some growth, you still find that you have the people-pleasing impulse. You still find yourself self-abandoning, but it is with your boss. It is with your partner. It is with your family, with people you care about, with people you want to impress. Not with complete strangers anymore. That is the same problem, but at a higher difficulty level. And then you do more growth, you do more introspection, you do more therapy, and then you still find yourself being people-pleasing, but it's towards your parents, not complete strangers and not your friends, not your peers. Again, that is the same problem at a higher difficulty level. And first of all, that is completely normal. That is a normal way in which growth progresses. And I think we often tend to be too hard on ourselves. I give the example of with your parents because you can absolutely make lots of progress and do lots of stuff to change your mindset and change your behavior and change all kinds of stuff about yourself. And then when you go see your parents, you just regress back into your childhood self and all the old patterns come back. That's completely normal. That doesn't mean that the therapy and the healing didn't work. That is just the highest difficulty level of like being your new self about the people who've known you literally from the day you were born. That is a higher difficulty level. And if you're still falling into some of these patterns with your parents, but you don't care about people pleasing random strangers anymore, you've made a lot of progress. The other direction is also a positive growth direction if you're spiraling downwards to deeper and more subtle layers of the same problem. Here's what that could look like. Here's an example from my own life where the idea of self-worth was one that I did a lot of work on and struggled a lot with, where originally I basically had such a low sense of self-worth, I felt like I didn't even have a right to exist. That's how deep it was. Like, I felt like I have to make a constant effort to prove my worth, otherwise I'm not even allowed to exist. Like my mere existence is a bit of a nuisance and the world would probably be better off without me. That's the feeling tone that I started out with. And then as I did lots and lots of healing and growth, that started getting better, but I would still be in situations where this feeling of I'm not worthy would come up. And it might be in relationships where I feel like, well, I'm not good enough for this partner. I don't deserve this relationship. Same problem, but it's a more subtle level of the same problem. And then as I keep going, where I am now with this is that still sometimes this feeling of I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough will still sometimes come up. But now it's usually so subtle that it doesn't even come attached to a story. Usually the bigger chunks of a problem are connected with a story. It's like, oh, this person is too good for me. I don't deserve this person in this relationship. Or some story, oh, this reminds me of the story in my childhood and that hurts. And then more and more subtle layers of it is just like almost like a little sparkle of that feeling of, oh, I'm not quite worthy. And I can just notice it and I can sit with it and it dissolves usually very quickly. That is the same problem. I'm re-encountering the same problem, but it gets more and more subtle and it's deeper and deeper layers of it. So same thing, that is still a form of growth. There are two ways to look at this. The first is that you're essentially getting immune to certain sources of what used to cause your problem. You're getting immune to being triggered in some contexts, but not all contexts all at once. And so you end up noticing the contexts where you still get triggered, of course, especially if you've already invested all this time and energy and so on into solving your problem. Then every time you feel that feeling again, or every time you fall into that pattern again, it feels extra bad, right? So in a way, it becomes more noticeable. You're like, oh my God, after all these breakthroughs and after all this time, I'm still doing this thing. And it becomes more noticeable. But actually what you're not noticing is all the times it didn't happen. And another way to see this, and this seems to be true from my observations, is that when you experience real growth, the world seems to serve you the opportunity to prove your growth and serve you the opportunity to like do your thing at a higher level. I've definitely noticed this, for example, with myself and my pattern of people-pleasing and self-abandonment, where as I've let go of that pattern, I've been confronted several times in my life with harder and harder situations, like more complicated situations, almost situations that invite me into the old pattern more and more strongly. Like the temptation, where it's like, look at how complicated and painful this situation is. Wouldn't it be nice to just self-abandon and do the people-pleasing thing? That is being served to me. And it seems like almost like an opportunity for me to do the new behavior and also to see my own growth, because I can be like, wow, okay, maybe this still triggered me a little bit, but I would have completely fallen apart in this situation a few years ago. So it's also an opportunity to see my own growth. Another sign to look out for is the frequency and intensity of occurrences. So you might notice that the frequency is lower. So you get triggered, but the triggers are further apart. Where it used to happen all the time, now it happens every few weeks, every few months, something like that. Or you might notice that the intensity gets lower, right? So it used to be you trigger up here, now it's this strong and the intensity is lowering over time. These are also signs that even though you're experiencing the same problem, you're experiencing them in a different way, and that is a sign of growth. So what are the takeaways from this? How can you actually use this for your personal growth? The first one is to expect the recurrence. So when you do the healing work, that you don't think, okay, I'm going to do a few months with this therapist and that's going to make the problem disappear, or I'm going to go to this retreat, or I'm going to do this plant medicine thing, and then the problem is going to disappear forever. And instead, understand that you are entering the growth spiral and probably this thing is going to come around. To not immediately fall back into, oh no, it's it's all for naught, this is not working for me, I'm a loser, whatever, right? That you don't start being hard on yourself or give up on the project of healing, but pay attention, like, hold on, is this happening on a spiral? Is this a higher level or a deeper layer? And on that note, it can be both of those at the same time. This is where having a journal of some kind can be super helpful, where you can check in with older entries and really compare, like, is this really the same situation that I find myself in, or is it evolving? One of the most frustrating examples of this is with relationships. If you find yourself in the same kind of conflict, or with romantic relationships, you can be in the situation where you're like, why do I keep attracting partners that create the same problems, the same drama, the same conflicts in my life over and over again? This can be one of the most exhausting loops to be stuck in. And there too, unfortunately, you might find that you think you've done all this healing, and I'm totally speaking from personal experience here, by the way, right? That you've done all this healing, how much better off you must be now, how much of your old patterns you've resolved, but then you find yourself again in a relationship seemingly with the same problems coming up, seemingly having the same conflicts. I had this experience very strongly, but when I paid attention to what is really going on, I could tell that even though some of the nature of the conflict was the same, it was happening at a much higher level, and that I was also a much better resource to handle it and move through it. And then finally was able to attract something different into my life. It basically took like 1 or 2 more rounds than I would have hoped. But it's important to notice the growth when it's happening. And another thing to do is to check in with the frequency or the intensity of the problem as it's occurring. Any changes in the frequency and intensity are a good sign, because you might find that initially it starts hitting you harder as you work through it. But as long as it's not just the same thing in the same way over and over again, that is a good sign. Although that is assuming that you're doing work on this thing, right? Like if you have an addiction and the frequency and the intensity increase, that's probably not a good sign unless you've been doing work that really moves something. Then yeah, if you get triggered more often initially, that can be a part of the healing process. So just to be clear, all of this applies to when you're actually doing work on stuff. Now, very importantly, the inverse of this is also true. So one problem can be that we are actually growing, that all the work we're doing is working and paying off, but we're not seeing it. And we're not seeing it in part just because of hedonic adaptation, right? When things get better, you get used to it. And it's much easier to notice what's not working than what is working. And so it's important to pay attention. If I'm doing this growth work and it seems like I'm retreading the same ground over and over again, to pay attention, is growth happening or not? And when growth is happening, well, to appreciate it and also to take encouragement from that to keep going. But you can also have the opposite problem. You can have the problem of doing all the healing work, going to all the retreats, doing all the stuff and telling yourself, look at all the breakthroughs I'm having, I'm changing my life, this solved everything, and then actually falling back into the same pattern. So you can essentially pretend to be doing growth work while keeping yourself stuck in a flat loop. And this is something that I'm going to make a separate video about. This is a very important and sticky topic to talk about. So for now, that is my take on growth spirals versus loops, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, so go ahead and leave a comment below.